So I tried a little experiment. As I said, my little brag about my last book did really well. So we went to Amazon with the book and with the audiobook, and we said we'd like to do it DRM free. And we understand that you can't change all the click-through stuff that people have to click through on it just for one book. But we'd like to introduce a clause to the beginning of the electronic edition that says, notwithstanding any other agreements, Random House Audio and Cory Doctorow give you permission to do anything with this book that's lawful under copyright law. Right? So that's like copyright complete EULA, right? It does everything that copyright law says, right? It's not inviting people to do piracy. It's just saying you can do all the stuff that copyright law says, and they refuse to allow it. They refused to allow me to do an audiobook without DRM at Audible for the first 2 books, and then for the third one they said that they would do it, but they wouldn't allow me to insert this language, and Apple said that they wouldn't carry it without DRM. So we often hear about how Apple hates DRM, Steve Jobs hates DRM. I think Steve Jobs hated DRM once he'd sold enough tracks to know that they had lock-in. And then he didn't hate DRM, and then he hated DRM. Apple's the largest DRM vendor in the world. I think it's kind of a silly thing to say that they hate DRM. So that's what's happened, right? The largest publisher in the world, Random House, goes to Amazon and says, we'd like to sell this book without DRM and on fair terms that are consistent with copyright law. And they say no. And they can say no because they know that people who love audiobooks are locked into their distribution channel, are locked into their device universe. So I think that this is a much bigger danger than the piracy that the DRM is supposed to prevent. And it actually led me to coin something that I grandiosely called Doctorow's Law, which is that anytime someone puts a lock on something that belongs to you and won't give you the keys, they're not doing it for your benefit. And so, some of you here are involved with the electronic distribution. I think it would be an interesting exercise for you to go to all your electronic distribution channels and just say, if an author came along and wanted to distribute some of her works through your channel, without DRM, and with something that absolves people of any contractual agreements apart from those that are represented in copyright law in their jurisdiction, would you let us? And is this our option? Or do we think that we're forcing you to have DRM, or is it the case that you're forcing us to have DRM and strict licensing terms? Have you managed to convince us that the reason that these licensing terms and this DRM is on here is down to us? Because if you read the stuff that came out of Amazon during the Amazon Holtzbrink fight, if you read the stuff that comes out of Apple every time this issue of DRM comes up, they say, well, it's not us, it's the stupid dinosauric publishers. It's those ancient reptilian record labels. They're so crazy about copyright, they make us put DRM on it. Right? Don't blame us, don't hate us. Hate those big dinosaur businesses that are suing their fans. And for so long as entertainment industry businesses go on doing this, they will continue to play the villain and allow Amazon and Apple to get away scot-free. So this is the big question. Is reading saturated, or is there a big audience waiting to discover books? And I think that we can break this into these two hypotheses down. So the first hypothesis, the saturated hypothesis, is the idea that books have really found, every story that can be told in books is being told in books, and everyone who wants to read one of those stories goes out and buys it in book form. And if book readership is declining, it's because of what always happens when a new medium comes along. So before the film was invented, every story that wanted to be told with live players was told on a stage. And then the film came along, and it turned out that there were a bunch of stories that were better suited to film than stage. And film just sort of peeled them out of the stage and left behind all that stuff that was sui generis to the stage and took everything along that worked better on a screen. And then the little screen, television, came along, and it peeled all those stories out of the film that were better suited to a little screen or an episodic form. And then YouTube came along, and it turned out that the natural length for televisual stories wasn't actually 22 minutes, that there were lots of stories that were 3 minutes long and 9 minutes long and that worked fine at 320 by 240. And a lot of those stories moved to the even smaller screen. And so maybe what's happened is that between interactive media and everything else that we're doing now, all the good stories have left books except for a few, and that's why people why there's a generation of people who are interested in reading books, and they've just kind of left the fold because, why read third generation extruded Tolkien product when you can go play World of Warcraft, which has all the benefits of reading, a kind of the weak tea, thrice brewed tea of Tolkien, plus you get to chat with millions of people and maybe one of them will have sex with you. So that's one hypothesis, right? They just left because all the good stories have moved to other media. The other hypothesis is that people have slowed down their readership because they're not being lured into readership the way that they used to be. And Tom Doherty at Tor tells a story about how prior to about the 80s, there were something like 400 distributors across America that distributed into non-bookstore venues, chemists, grocers, and so on. And they were small shops, so they were unionized because the union could gain leverage over the management. They weren't big firms that were able to break their unions. So they were unionized. That meant the Teamsters who actually stocked the shelves had job security. So they worked the same patch for 20 years. And also they got bonuses if they performed well, if the books that they set out sold well. And as a result, you have an enormous amount of local knowledge. And you had lots and lots of books in places where people who weren't yet readers might find them. People who didn't go down to the bookshop, who didn't even know that bookshops existed, and didn't know why they would go into one. Those people would nevertheless find great books. And my editor, Patrick Nielsen Hayden at Tor, grew up in suburban Phoenix, small, kind of extremely benighted part of the world. And he found his first science fiction novel, Samuel Delaney's Dahlgren, experimental new wave science fiction that features sex with dolphins, on the spinner rack at a chemist's outside of suburban Phoenix in the early 70s. And that's what the diversity of titles used to look like. And with the growth of big box stores, they demanded national distributorship. And we collapsed from like 400 to 3 to 1. And then, one of the big distributors 2 years ago, American Entertainment Group, I think they were called, their entire CEO suite was cleared out by the FBI, and they collapsed. And, they were all like committing terrible fraud. And, they were 50% of the American book sales because they were into Walmart and into Kmart and so on, and just complete like disaster. So that consolidation in the distribution chain outside of bookshops, this is the other hypothesis, has meant that people don't ever discover that they want to be readers. And so they never discover that there's a bookshop, not with like a few thousand SKUs like the mall bookshops I grew up with, but with like 25,000, 30,000, 100,000 SKUs in these monster, beautiful bookshops waiting for them to turn up and buy some books. And so that's the other hypothesis. So if that's true, if it's true that there's a lot of demand elasticity out there, that waiting out there are a bunch of people who don't yet know that they're readers that we could lure into the tent, then maybe it's time to start turning the knob away from price discrimination and worrying so much about whether or not a low-cost ebook will cannibalize a higher-cost hardcover, and more towards demand elasticity and figuring out how to reach those markets that are as yet not cognizant of the fact that they are readers, that they want to be readers. They don't know it yet. So at one end of the spectrum you have free ebooks, which is what I've done, but then you have things like day and date releases. So you have Mark Cuban, who's quite a flamboyant American entrepreneur, who decided that he was going to do day and date releases of films. So he founded Magnolia Pictures. He bought a chain of cinemas, he bought a distributorship, and now his films come out as DVDs, as video on demand, and in cinemas all on the same day, and they're doing very well. They're actually returning a higher return on his investment than the price discrimination model is for the traditional studios, in the same way that airlines like JetBlue and EasyJet and Southwest Airlines are more profitable pound in, pound out than the heavily price discriminated airlines like BA, which of course have lots of other baggage as well, like having to fly unprofitable routes because they're the flagship carriers and having unionized workforces and lots of other things that contribute to their bottom line. But it is worth noting that the airlines with totally transparent pricing, where you can just go to a website and they tell you this is what the ticket costs, this is what it'll cost tomorrow, this is what it'll cost the next day, are actually outperforming the airlines that are practicing heavy discrimination. Controlling prices, this ability to control prices, is not necessarily conducive to maximizing your profits. So Macmillan, it was funny that it was Macmillan that went to war over the right to control their prices and their destiny, because of course Macmillan was bought by Holtzbrinck, Holtzbrinck being a German publisher that was big enough to buy Macmillan. Now German publishers have all their prices fixed by government. So Holtzbrinck made enough money selling books at a price fixed not by like a bookseller, who presumably wants to sell books, but by a bureaucrat, and nevertheless made so much in profits that they were able to buy one of the largest Anglo-American book publishers in the world. So this is, it's at least an existence proof of the idea that the ability to price your own wares is not necessarily the path to maximum profitability. But more important than that, I think, is to take such steps with your business as are conducive to a competitive and I might even say disorganized ecosystem in the distribution channel. What you don't want is consolidation in your distribution channel into a few booksellers, a few distributors.